Our next presenter, Daren Hill, comes to us all the way from the States. Initially, I've worked for a major media conglomerate in the US. About 20 years ago, wrote a paper on this thing they called the World Wide Web. So obviously someone who's really good at looking forward at technology and the implications and what we know, what we think we know, but we're not quite getting right, all that sort of stuff. And really is I suppose, passionate about bringing technology and organizational or just normal behavior together. You know, how do you use technology and social media for good? Would you please welcome our next presenter to get you thinking a little bit more, Daren Hill.
Cue the noise. Hey, beautiful. Hi, I'm Daren. I got to probably clear a couple of things, clear the air before we get going and get into it. No, I'm not from Canada. I'm from the other one. And yes, my mom and dad voted for him. They did. They did. I know. Imagine how that feels for me. So the other thing I want to clear up is I get a bit excited, and there's every possibility a four-letter word's going to sneak out, okay? So I beg for your forgiveness, or I even beg for a little bit of laughter, but it comes from a place of excitement, so I sometimes can't control it, and so it could sneak out, and so I'm sorry to Andy and everyone if that's going to be the case. You can gather by my pacing. When Dr. Marks sort of asked me to have a chat here today, I quickly got a metaphor in my mind of what it feels like and the feel for the day and what sort of role I can play. And has anyone ever seen a streaker at a sporting event? All right? So I'm kind of your streaker today. I'm super drunk on technology and ideas. I'm going to rip through for a little while. You might feel a little uncomfortable and maybe not want to stare too long at it, but hopefully what it will do as I streak through some of these things, it'll prompt some good questions and you're going, wow, what was that? And hopefully it's a bit enjoyable. So with the streaking out of the way, a little bit about me and my background. As Nigel said, I come from another four-letter word world of consulting. So I spend a lot of my time doing consulting work, oftentimes big consulting and big projects for big clients. And we are really, really great at making things complicated. And right, so we think big global this and big merger that and big technology and follow all the rules. And we get really good at that, right? And we convince ourselves that, wow, this big systemic problem must need a big, gigantic systemic solution. And as the years go on, you travel the world and you sort of see the reinvention happening over and over and over. It gets tiring. And to be frank, after about 15 years, I was miserable. And a lot of my peers were. And so luckily, I stumbled on this book in 2012 called Reality is Broken. Has anyone ever heard of the book Reality is Broken? No, Reality is Broken was written by Jane McGonigal, who is a now very famous game designer. And what Jane went on to describe is she explored the question, why? Why are literally hundreds of millions of people from age 4 to age 94, why are hundreds of millions of people spending billions of dollars, gaming was bigger than the media industry by this time, and many billions of hours playing games and playing video games and online games? What is it? And she goes on to juxtapose how our reality is broken and sort of demystifying and breaking the myths around that gamers are just the nerds that look like me and we sit in our chairs with VR goggles and we die in our seat after having 24 pizzas in 24 hours. No, gaming has a whole bunch of attributes which relate to technology and behavior. Gaming has great sense of purpose. Gaming has huge voluntary communities. I log online to play my game, to collaborate and communicate with others. We see constant sense of achievement, constant feedback from the people we play with, from leaderboards, from tags, all kinds of stuff. And I read this book and I said, holy crap, my last 15 years of consulting, we've been doing it all wrong. We really have been doing it all wrong. We've been doing this thing where we've been creating amazing solutions for our clients and delivering solutions to our clients, when in fact the magic is a completely reshifted model. The magic is doing it with your clients, with your communities. And thank God I read that book, because the last several years I've tried to transition my life to unlearn some bad habits, unlearn some bad overcomplicating behaviors, and explore this world of where really cool technology like online gaming can help spur different conversations, can spur great psychology, can spur great communities, can create places of trust. So that's what's sort of the frame for my day. And so I'm going to streak through some really great examples from what I've seen in my work where I see technology helping us do really cool stuff. The first one I want to talk about is a movement more than an organization, a movement called Precious Plastic. Now, Precious Plastic was started in the Netherlands about 4 or 5 years ago by a guy called Dave Hawkins. Precious Plastic does something really simple. It takes your recycled plastic and makes beautiful stuff. And what they've done, right, the magic with these guys, what they've done is they created these machines that takes your recycled plastic, it shreds it down, the next machine melts it, and depending on the sophistication, how much money you have to start it, you can get 3D printed fancy models of things that come out, or just simple injection moldings into various different products. So really, really simple idea, right? The cool part about Precious Plastics is that these things cost altogether maybe a few $100s. And the materials to put the machines together and assemble them can be accessible anywhere in the world, whether in sub-Saharan Africa or here in Western Sydney. So they've thought about this really simple idea, how do we make this global and how do we make it accessible? So what are some of the things that the Precious Plastics can do? One of them is if they have enough volume, you can create construction materials. So the recycled bottles and plastics can create beautiful colored and very strong beams. There's great stories that they have on their website around a local community, a disadvantaged community who had real struggles getting funding for their schools. And the children around the area went on a big campaign to gather the bottles over a period of time, and one of the engineers volunteered to build the Precious Plastics. And what they did, right, was they created all these great construction materials and then all together built themselves an amazing playground, right? And so an idea seeded in the Netherlands, open sourced the world, let kids in different parts of the world go, you know what? They got to experience something from the recycled bottle all the way through to how a community comes together to build a playground. Precious Plastics can do stuff like products. One of the famous ones that they make a lot of money from is doing iPhone covers. I thought of one the other week when the council came and picked up, or ironically, my recycling bin, the yellow lidded recycling bin, and it, that big pincher that must pick it up and dumps it in, it must have gone off or gone awry or gotten too strong because it was mangled. So I called the council and said, hey, my recycling bin's is broken. What can you do? And they said, well, we'll have the guys come take a look at it and they'll either fix it or they'll go to the warehouse and get you a new one. And I just had this little dreamy, winsome moment. Oh, wouldn't it have been great if my council would have said, hey, you know what? Our Precious Plastics guys, they've got a container where they've got the recycled materials, and off the back end of it becomes your beautiful new recycled bins that you can put your recycling in. So a little dreamy moment here last week with these guys. So how does this relate to digital? How does this relate to technology? And here's something I want to plant the seed, and something I'm looking for throughout the day is the magic of this idea is that it's fully, wholly open sourced. Not just open sourced in the blueprints for the machines, that's very much there. It's open sourced in the videos and tutorials. It's open sourced all the ideas and for creating new products and for how to establish it. It's open source for how to get communities involved around it. And what that signals for me is not just open source code, which is oftentimes where we hear that word, it's an open source mindset. All the intellectual property, all the ideas are meant to be owned by the community, meant to be owned by those who it impacts the most. This is new way of thinking. This is how Wikipedia 20 years ago beat Microsoft and Encarta. If you would have placed a bet 20 years ago, it is the most powerful, most profitable, most gigantic and influential technology company in the world. Who's going to win the race to build the world's encyclopedia? Is it going to be Microsoft or a whole bunch of people who have day jobs and working for free? We probably would have said Microsoft. But human behavior, right? We love to work together. We are tribal. That's what the beauty of open sourcing is. They've open sourced everything, and the impact that they're having is they've got some 40,000 members. We've got a couple of actually Precious Plastics here in the Hills district that have opened recently. And this community as well, right? Here's the other open source platform. It's not just a flat website where you see data. You can double click on each one of these little flags and learn about their project and connect with them and give them ideas. They truly open source and put this community into the stewardship and the ownership of the recycling of plastic. A little bit of a segue to here and today. Another thing I'm known for, not just my streaking, but I tend to poke the bear a little bit, and I asked Andy, Dr. Marks, if I could poke the bear a little bit today, and of course he said yes. He's a yes and guy. His wife, it doesn't sound like he is. The economics. This page, this chart, is sort of imprinted in my brain. When I wake up in the morning, this is sort of sitting in the back. It's one of those things that I think about, that simmers with me and kind of gets me out of bed basically every day. So I'm asking you to read this one. There's a bit of data on here. I'm going to walk you through it. Oops. There we go. This is showing price changes from a whole bunch of range of goods and services over the last 20 years. And yes, before you crucify me, that's data from America, but I assure you, our data in Australia looks almost completely parallel. The only line that wavers a bit is our housing line. So this is not just a proxy for Australia. This is largely what our data looks like as well. So you can see the red stuff. Red is bad. Red means it's a lot more expensive, right? Blue is good. Blue means it's really, really cheap, right? And not surprisingly, I'm sure it's known to most people in this room that look at the stuff at the top. That's your hospital services, your child care, college tuition, right? College textbooks, and child care and medical services, right? And down at the bottom, we've got TVs and toys and software. Now, this prompts for me 1,000 questions. But the two that jumped out for me, and the ones that drive my engine room for the work I do and the work I want to do, is what does this mean for inequality? What does this mean for the disadvantaged? Right? What does this mean when we've got the things at the top, the most difficult to acquire, most difficult to attain, the most expensive? What's it mean in a world where we have growing inequality, wage inequality? That's the one that drives sort of the human side of how I think and how I work. The other one is maybe more prescient for us here at Catalyst West is, what does that signal about innovation? What does it signal about us and the institutions that create and develop these products and services? What's it say about their structures? What's it say about their approaches? What's it say? Right? And it's that sort of inquiry that says, that drives me to think about how do we use technology to create new ways of working. One of the counter arguments, first though, before we jump into the institutions and our structures ourselves, is, you know what? It's actually a lot harder to deliver medical services than it is to build the TV, right? So the complexity of medical services or of health are a lot more difficult. This is a chart you do not have to read, it's just symbolic. This is a chart which shows the obesity system influence. So these are at least 8 domains of influence around what goes into the obesity epidemic. Everything from food manufacturing through to physiology, through to psychology, and to, of course, our place and movement. And I look at this sort of data, and I look at this chart, and it has an incomprehensible amount of connections and nodes. Like, imagine what that's like for the individual who suffers from it. What's that like to navigate through all the different services, to navigate through life changes and try to figure out, how do I do this? How do I improve? How do I fix this problem? And they deal with myriad advice from private sector, from their health funds, from public sector, from their families, and it changes all the time. So I imagine, what's it like for us trying to deliver services and trying to help things like the obesity epidemic? It's really, really difficult. It requires a massive synchronization, which I assure you doesn't always happen, for dealing with these things across sectors and multilateral things that are very, very, very hard to contain and are very difficult to put programs or just policies around or put buildings around. Or worse, let single agencies of our government have to deal with. So I look at then, what is it about these institutions? What is it about us and the construct of them and the economics of why is it these things are getting so expensive and toys and games are really cheap? It comes to this innovation question, another proxy for me. I'm going to poke a bear a little bit, especially tipping my hat to our sponsors here, is looking just at the not-for-profit sector for a moment, which is a big area for, obviously, with government, not-for-profit sector doing service delivery. The not-for-profit sector in Australia is about $200 billion in revenue and about $350 billion in assets. And yes, we can debate the messiness of those numbers afterwards. That categorizing and getting those numbers is not an easy task. But follow my thinking here. We've got about $350 billion in assets. And what's your best guess about what 2/3 or 70% of those assets are classified as? Anyone have a guess? Real estate. So we just looked at our big giant spider diagram of trying to think about the obesity epidemic. That's just one health concern. And yet 2/3 up to 70% of all of our assets in the not-for-profit sector, and this is a beautiful, beautiful place. This is you might recognize the Gold Coast University Hospital, cost about $2 billion. So I don't mean to pick on that, but we use our buildings. And imagine what goes into the construction of, the conceptualization of, the maintenance of our land and our properties. And it has nerds like me and sort of scratching my head and going, is that mission serving? Are we going far enough with the way we think about and classify our assets and what we invest in to serve the mission? To serve the mission of the confused individuals who are trying to navigate a complex world dealing with their obesity problem. So where to from here, right? Ban Ki-moon said very clearly a couple years ago, Ban Ki-moon, the Secretary General of the UN for about 10 years, those of you who know him, he had three major passions. One was to eradicate the corruption and the lack of transparency in humanitarian aid. Another one was around youth and youth involvement. And the third one was data, right? And so Ban Ki-moon, one of his legacies he left was something they call the Sustainable Development Goals, the 17 United Nations SDGs for short, the 17 Sustainable Development Goals. And you can see the range of those. But I don't want to talk about the goals themselves. What I want to talk about is how these things are coming to life. And so the company up in the corner is ICSO. Now, ICSO is a South African-based foundation. And they've got a really, really, really audacious goal. What ICSO is trying to do is build a protocol. To build a protocol for social impact measurement on every one of these 17 domains. What do I mean by a protocol, right? If anyone who's ever worked in the social impact and social measurement space knows it's complex and difficult and time-consuming and elusive and a whole bunch of other pejorative words. It's really, really hard. And so what they're trying to do with their protocol is to saying for each of these domains, what are the signals? How do we know when someone's not homeless? What are the variables that go into their homelessness? Who are the authorities and what are the entities that would verify the impacts the claims that we're making for making social impact? And the magic of this, the vision of them, of ICSO, is this will be stored in the blockchain. I think we'd spend 2 days or 2 years talking about the blockchain. But what I'll say about the blockchain is that the power of what it can do, it could do in situations like with social impact and social impact measurement, is allows for things to be really, really transparent. Right? If it's verified by sources whom we trust, the experts in the domain said, yep, these are the right signals and these impacts are being made, it makes reporting really, really simple. So it gives government a lot of confidence that their missions are being served. It gives impact investors and other investors confidence that their money is going towards good. And it just builds trust in the entire system. So when I see my data, my impact, my team, my project going up in the blockchain, it's transparent and for all to see. So no doubt ICSO, we're going to hear a lot more about them as the years go on. Now, this isn't fully formed and fully baked. They're a startup as well. And so ICSO have started with a really small problem, which is how do we verify that children in South Africa actually attend schools? And so they've got their foundational app to prove their product was getting children tracked in schools so that teachers didn't have to go through this headache of trying to find, identify, cajole, caress paperwork that gets lost in a whole bunch of ether. They have a simple app into the blockchain so that the funding can be released and verified with really good data. streaker idea number 2. This is something called HarassMap. HarassMap is a movement in Egypt. You can probably guess by the lines. What HarassMap is doing is trying to break the culture of sexual harassment in this part of the world. And so what they've done is, again, this theme of open source. They have built a tool, they've built an online forum, they built an online community which encourages people to tell their story. To come forward and anonymously post that said this event occurred. And every time an event occurs, you know, another dot goes on the bubble. And the bigger the bubble, the more events. And so what happens, right? What happens and what they're seeing happen is as you provide something as simple as a place, an online forum that captures my story, right? You start to give confidence to the victims. They're starting to see that, you know what? They're educating that this is actually a crime. And no more excuse making for the sometimes ignorant perpetrators. This is actually a crime. And most importantly, this is about building the trust in the community. If I see my stories and my data up here against everyone else's, we start to build a movement. And we can collaborate and we can talk and share more information more confidently and build campaigns to help solve this problem. Last example I want to fly through is a local one. So the MySay app. MySay was a product of a hackathon. RMIT and the Australian Blockchain Association Australia, one of the two, they ran a hack last year. And so they invited teams from all over the place. You know, nerds like me and teams who've been thinking about living blockchain, in particular, it's a blockchain hackathon, who've been living the stuff and living the technology to have a hack. And the winning app, the MySay app, was inspired by young voters. So young voters who for the first time go into their council building, they see bricks and mortar, and they see people with this gigantic book, right, to try and find your name. And young people are going, this doesn't look like my iPad. And then they get the thing. This is the voting sheet, right? They get the voting sheet and I go, the sum total, 1, you've made me travel, 2, I had to go to a church, 3, what the heck is that book? 4, why do I need to have my driver's license? I am who I am. 5, what the heck is this voting form? And they said, come on, grown-ups, honestly. And so the MySay app was a blockchain app to do identification and authentication to improve voting and increase participation, particularly amongst the youth. And this team won 3rd prize and they got a whole bunch of money for winning the prize, and they presented to a council of super big wigs with fancy titles in Palo Alto. Who's the winning team? Wait for it. Jackie said there'd be a delay. These amazing young women. Melbourne Girls Grammar, year 10 STEM students. They had conceived the idea, they had worked on it in their class, they'd got some coaching from their teachers and from others, and they championed this and took it to California and said, yep, that's an amazing idea. So why I love this story in particular is that a lot of tech and digital we can have apprehensions about it. What the heck does it actually mean? How would I know how to do anything with it? At the same time, we often hear, right, a lot of these conferences, or the tech conferences anyway, are dominated by the evangelists who say, yes, the blockchain will solve all your problems. Everything's big data. Hooray. Do this and, you know, step 1, do this. Step 3, everyone's happy, right? So this, to me, almost drilled home why I continue to do what I do and charge on in my startup is that if we work together and collaborate and bring diverse skills together, we can do amazing stuff. We don't need to be blockchain experts to do it. So where do I fit in? I promise I'll wrap Nigel in a minute. My little company is Blockchange. This is the group we call our peers. And this little system between, I guess we think of ourselves as intermediaries between funders and service providers and the measurement community. And we dream, I guess our dream is to have this, instead of full of bricks and mortar, instead of full of big onerous programs, instead of full of opaque and stressful and competitive funding processes, that this entire process is just full of really rich data and really good data that are helping us be really precise with our interventions helping us be a little more surgical with the things that we do and try to make really small impacts and let them spread. Kind of like my friends at Precious Plastic, the way they had a little simple idea about recycling plastic has gone absolutely global and viral. So that's it for me. I hope I've streaked through enough and provoked some thoughts and generated some ideas, and I'll say thank you.